Hello, and welcome to this all virtual edition of our course. I am homesick today, and I'm putting this recorded lecture online. So today is kind of a turning point in this whole course. Up till now, we have been really, focusing on the lead up to applying for PhD programs. Things like, is it time yet? What is it like to be a PhD student? And as we got to last time, what does it take to get in? So last time, we focused on a few more readily quantifiable things about UW genetics applicants who were either invited to interview or were not. We did that both in terms of full-time research month equivalents, as I called them, and in terms of GPA, with research experience being a moderately powerful predictor of interview status. GPA somewhat less so. And then just as another easy to summarize thing, I looked at the ones we did invite and pointed out that that rather few of them had a first author or co-first author paper. So one conclusion from the analysis last time was that these factors are not everything. And clearly, our admissions committee valued other things, whether it was statement or recommendation letters, or any number of other things about these applicants. So today, we're kind of turning the corner, and we're really going to dive into the PhD application itself today. So I'm going to step through each element of the applications that we look at. So this is the first in a couple of different sessions where, I'll kind of give you an admissions eye view of this whole application process. And we're going to especially focus today on a couple of items. One is the CV, and the other is letters of recommendation, in particular, the question of who you should consider asking for them. So that's where we're going today. And then in future classes, we'll spend some more time talking about other elements, especially the statement of purpose. So this is what the first page of an application looks like by the time it gets to me. And so this is just basic information that you probably have readily available about yourself. So nothing to really worry about there. Actually, though, as of this year, the admissions committee will not be able to view the ethnicity race category. Some UW programs, including ours, also have what they call a supplemental application. So I don't know if you'll encounter other programs that ask what we do in this part of our supplemental application. Here we are asking applicants to spell out their research experience in kind of a consistent way, because otherwise it was taking us a bit of effort to really get a sense of what each applicant's research experience was. So we're asking, we're asking for the institution, the mentor's name, and the number of months in that lab, and the average hours per week during these months, from which you can calculate my FTRME statistic that we looked at last time. And so, I think we have space for up to 5 of those. So, this is part of our supplemental application. The other part of our supplemental application is giving some dedicated space for a short statement about diversity, and I think that especially this year and beyond, you'll probably see some type of statement of this type more often than not. But one thing that you might find challenging is that it may differ from place to place. So, in particular, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision to, forbid consideration of race, even in the case of racial groups that are extremely underrepresented in particular fields. Programs, need to, consider, how they can advance their own goals and priorities in terms of program diversity and contributing to the diversity of science more generally, without taking those specific categories into account. And so, I think that you'll see very frequently some type of prompt that, it invites you to speak to your potential contributions to diversity, or, invites you to, talk about ways that, you have overcome adversity. I don't know. But I think that you'll see this kind of thing more and more often. This is the specific example for our own program. So, this is just kind of asking them to write the equivalent of like a substantial paragraph. And it's asking, what do you see as your potential role and or contribution to create a more diverse, accepting, and stimulating community, campus, and society? Different applicants, take different approaches with that, and that's fine. We want to hear what each of them has to say in this context. And this is something that we had already implemented even before the Supreme Court decision. And so I just think it'll be something that you see, again, more often than not from here on out. All right, so that's the end of our supplemental application. And I do want to point out that in terms of diversity-oriented statements, we're going to take the class session 2 weeks from now to discuss that at greater length. All right, the next part of the application that appears to us is academic information, first of all. And so we see, like each university attended by an applicant, and things like, their major, their dates of attendance, their GPA. Most, especially like US institutions, usually you don't know like what your class rank would be, but for some students, like from other countries where there's very different grading scales used, sometimes they are aware of their class rank, and that can help give context, if we don't know like what a GPA of 11.3 means for them. The other section that appears here, although it is typically blank, is self-reported test scores. And that's because there are no tests required for application to our program. And I think that you will generally find that to be the case, at least in biology programs. As you get, closer to other fields like chemistry and physics, you may still see some test requirements potentially, but in biology, those have really been swept out in the last few years, partly out of concern regarding the cost of those tests. and how that interacts with the overall cost of applying to graduate programs. So we do still allow applicants to send us scores from either the GRE, the general one, or the subject GRE, like biology, but not that many do, and that's fine. Some people might feel like it helps their case in some way. I don't know, maybe they had low grades as an undergrad, but it's been a few years and they're just looking for some way to to show good performance in an academic like context. That is possible, but in general, this is not a big difference maker, even if the scores are present. The other test that some applicants do report, at least some international applicants, is the either the TOEFL test or the IELTS test. But you shouldn't have to worry about any of these, because even for non-US citizens, we do not, and probably other universities do not, require them to be taken if you attended an English-speaking university previously, like UW-Madison. So at least for those who are taking this UW course, that may not be an issue. But for those international students who do need to report these test scores, those results are actually fairly important. We do consider English ability to be a pretty strong predictor of success in our graduate program. And so that's the one instance where scores are pretty important. Even though we recognize that it can be a considerable financial burden to pay for these tests, depending on the country of origin for an applicant. The next thing that appears to us is a set of questions about the applicant's background and household situation. So in part, these questions seem to be meant to address either participation in specific programs that the university itself wishes to track information about, like how often is participation in this program leading to application to our graduate school, because maybe that's a desired result. In other cases, these questions may even get at financial need in terms of the applicant's family background, like the Pell Grant question here. And likewise, there's a question about first-generation college student status. And so, that could be defined in different ways. Here, they're rather specific. Did either of your parents or legal guardians attend a higher education institution? Usually, though, first-generation college student status is asking more specifically about whether either parent received a bachelor's degree or above. And these factors can also, to some extent, factor into considerations of program diversity and the distinct perspectives that individuals from different socioeconomic backgrounds might bring to science. And so, yeah, there's just a couple questions like that, and then there's questions about household size. It's not usually a consideration for us at all. I don't know why the university wants to know it. For college students, it can be sometimes challenging to decide, like, what do I define as my household? I think traditionally, like, if you are still primarily supported by your parents, then you consider yourself to be part of their household still. And it partly might depend on, like, whether you're claimed as a dependent on your parents' taxes, let's say, and whether some of your siblings are as well. But you might find further instructions on the relevant application page. The next thing that we see after those questions is the statement of purpose, which is really just like the file that the applicant uploaded. And this is going to be our entire focus next time around. And for now, I'll just, kind of give you this little preview from our website. So these are questions that I specifically wrote because I wanted to make sure that we were letting our applicants know what we were looking for and not just having it, fall to whether they had good advice about what to put in this document from someone else. So, this is something that we will focus on more next time. I'm just putting these questions here for reference. And also because your first draft of your statement of purpose is due in 2 weeks. The next thing that shows up here is the transcripts that we've received from, in all cases, an undergraduate institution, sometimes other institutions as well. So even current undergrads have sometimes accumulated credits elsewhere for different reasons. Either they may have transferred or they may have taken summer classes at another institution, occasionally even like taking a college class late in high school. And then, of course, for applicants who are a little ways out from their bachelor's degree, there may be transcripts from a master's institution or from some other type of postgraduate coursework, like a post-bac program or certificate program. The next thing we'll spend a little bit more time on today, the curriculum vitae. And this is a very common thing in science and academia more broadly. It is very closely related to the idea of a resume, just with, some stylistic differences, I suppose. And so, this is meant to really primarily summarize your progress as a scientist and your educational background. But there can be, especially at this career stage, there can be some broader activities mentioned, as I'll elaborate on. And so some of the information that this will include would be, in addition to summarizing your educational background here at UW, focusing on your research experience a good bit. So when and with who did you work and what did you work on? What research skills have you acquired? And, what sort of scientific products have you communicated? So, maybe publications, otherwise, have you presented your research in some form? And teaching experience if you have any, but, more broad activities that reflect especially like, leadership experience or like outreach can be worth including. And so that can even include like, important roles you've had in like non-science clubs, which, at my career stage, that wouldn't appear necessarily on my CV, but for you, that could be totally reasonable. So I'm gonna spell out kind of an example, just kind of a crude template, and I'm not trying to make this look super nice or anything, but so usually your name is at the top of your CV, and increasingly some people are including pronouns with their name there. Next is usually contact information. A lot of people do actually put their mailing address. I don't know if that's essential necessarily. I do think it's important to put your email address and your phone there, just to make sure that everyone has the contact information that they need for you. And then usually what comes next is a section about your educational background in this general sort of format. I'd say usually GPA is there, but that doesn't mean it necessarily has to be. Sometimes it's not, and that's okay. You're welcome to present yourself in whatever way you think is most beneficial to you. And then usually, pretty soon there is, ideally at least, a straightforward depiction of research experience. So here I'm spelling out a lot of the information that was on our supplemental application, but again, most programs might not specifically ask you for that. And it really helps admissions reviewers if you can do a clear job of spelling out your research experience. So who did you work with? What were the dates? At least down to the month. You can put your hours a week if you like. I think it especially benefits you to cite any full-time or mostly full-time research that you've done, even if it's just like for a summer. So it's nice to illustrate that. Remember, programs do like to see that someone has experienced full-time research and still wants to do more of it. So you could spell that out for each lab you've been in, and if applicable, you could separate out, if you've worked on 2 different projects in the same lab, you could spell that out. And just kind of a short description, at most a few lines probably, of like the goals of that project and what you did. After that, in my sample here, I have publications and presentations. I know many of you won't have any publications to list. You don't have to have like a blank section here for that. You can just list your presentations instead if you have those. So, this is a typical sort of format that publications might be listed in. And it's good to clarify if these are published as indicated by the volume and page numbers in the first publication here, or if they are submitted at this time, but not yet accepted. Or if they're accepted, but not yet, in an issue, you can write accepted. Accepted by the Journal of Cool Student Projects, for example. And then, presentations are often listed in a somewhat similar format, but after the title of the project or the title of your presentation, you would often put the venue, like the name of the conference, and the format of that presentation. So this is definitely worth including if you've done it. People do like to see that you've had some experience presenting your work. I wouldn't include here just like leading a lab meeting necessarily. But if you presented your work in any other context beyond the scope of your immediate lab. Other things that you might consider including, if they're relevant to your background. Maybe not that many of you have teaching experience, but if you do, I'd say go ahead and mention it. Even if that's more along the lines of tutoring, And in some cases that might kind of spill over into the outreach category, like if you're, especially if you're working with like K-12 students or something like that. But it can't hurt to mention any sort of community service work that you've done. And yeah, I mentioned, that it could be especially relevant to mention extracurricular activities that show some leadership on your part, or, contributions toward, broader goals in science or beyond or in society. And if you have academic honors and awards to mention, then you can mention them here. If not, no problem. So this, students might often mention like how many times they've been on the dean's list or something like that. Can't say it makes an enormous difference, but you're free to mention it. And the other thing that often appears, and you certainly could put this up with the research experience, closer to that part of the CV. For whatever reason, I often see this toward the end of the CV, but it doesn't have to be there. Is a summary of the research skills that you have acquired thus far. And so this provides a convenient reference for maybe a prospective advisor, who might prefer that a potential student has at least some initial background in the type of research methodology that they employ, whether that is in terms of like molecular lab skills or familiarity with computational approaches, whether it's just like Linux command line or actually programming in some languages, or doing statistics in R. That's all certainly worth mentioning. And if you have experience with certain like statistical methods for data analysis, that's also well worth mentioning here. And if you have specific field experience as well, you can certainly put that. So that's kind of the extent of it for what I imagined you might want to include in your CV. The CV is, you want to do a good job with it because it's going to be one of the items in perhaps every application you submit. But I don't know that it's an enormous difference maker for me. What do I, before we put in our supplemental application, I really relied on the CV to, orient me in terms of the student's research experience. And so that's probably still the case with most programs. And, there's other little things I might notice, from research skills to publications and presentations to leadership experiences, teaching, outreach. It's all relevant, but I feel like you'll want to put more time into your statement of purpose, relatively speaking. The other thing we're really going to focus on today are letters of recommendation. And so I guess the first question is, how many do you need? And the answer is generally 3. That seems to be a pretty across the board pattern. Now, most applicants submit exactly that many. And for most of them, that might be the right approach. Some do submit 4 or even 5, or request them from 4 or 5 recommenders. Why might you do that? Well, if you're concerned about whether one of your recommenders is really going to get it done on time, generally speaking, we get our letters on time or pretty close to it. Not in every case, though. And so, you might, depending on how the system is set up at a university, you might be able to tell whether your letters are all in, or you might not. If you feel like, based on the specific individuals that you prefer to ask, that one of them might struggle with this, with getting their letter in a timely manner for whatever reason, that could be a reason to consider asking for a 4th. Now, if the one you're concerned about is a really critical letter, then it may not help to have a substitute letter from someone else. Like the letter from your current advisor. If that doesn't come in, you're sunk anyway. If there's a non-advisor letter, like you'd really like one for this person, but you're a little concerned that they might be a little overloaded, maybe you'd include a 4th one as well. The downside of including a 4th or 5th one, I guess, is that that might sort of dilute the spotlight that you'd like to shine on your most important letters. But on the other hand, some applicants might just have let's say 4 letters that are really quite meaningful for them. Maybe they've worked in multiple different labs, then they have another letter that they really feel strongly about as well. So if that's the individual situation, then that could make sense. Next question. So aside from how many to ask for, who should you ask? Of course, my immediate knee-jerk answer is research advisors. And I would include in that both current and past research advisors, if that is plausible and sensible in your individual case. So in general, I would say, by research advisor, I mean the research group leader. So the professor or the group leader of some other type of lab. And even if you have mainly worked with another lab member, like maybe you've been working under a grad student or a postdoc, what you don't want is a letter from, let's say, that postdoc and no letter from the professor. You don't want that. Occasionally, we do get like a second letter from the same lab. That can be okay. I'm not saying not to do it. It can also be an option to have the group leader incorporate in the text of their own letter sentiments from another lab member. Sometimes they even just paste in a whole block quote, maybe from an email that grad student sent to them, or that postdoc, talking about how great this undergrad was to work with. That can be done. It's totally fair game. And in that sense, it's only taking up one letter of your 3 or so. So regardless of the details, though, you do want a letter from the group leader of the lab that you're in. And I would say, in most cases, I would recommend also asking past research advisors for letters of recommendation. Unless you really think, it would be negative, or from sounding them out, you're not sure that they could give a positive letter. You know, when we see applicants, you know, request an extra letter from an instructor who probably doesn't have that much to say, and not request a letter of recommendation from a past advisor, it does raise questions for us, I would say. Like, you know, is it possible that that previous research experience didn't go so well, and that's why there's no letter? So, you know, even if you just think that past advisor would give you, you know, a decent but not great letter, might be worth including just to show that it wasn't bad, basically. So yeah, missing advisor letters are somewhat conspicuous to us because in general, we like to see, you know, letters that speak to how the research experiences that you've listed went. And again, if you're not sure if someone can write a good letter for you, ask them, you know, be a little bit bold in how you ask that question. Like, uh, you know, let them know what your goals are. You know, ask them if they're supportive of you pursuing that, and if they can, if they feel like they would be able to provide, you know, a positive, helpful letter of recommendation for your applications. And you know, if they seem unsure about that, then well, you could consider others. So most of you don't have three different research advisors that you could ask from different labs, at least in this undergraduate class, and even more broadly, that is true of our applicants. Some do, but most don't. And so, you know, the one thing I want to emphasize right off the bat is that these other letters of recommendation are unlikely to make or break your graduate application. They're going to be there, and you know, people will look at them to some degree, but you know, there's usually not such consequential information presented in them, to be honest. So yeah, I mentioned that some people include a second letter from their own lab, at least if it's someone who has a PhD. But you know, this is usually all reflected in the main advisor's letter. So who else would you ask? So most often, what we see are letters from faculty instructors, you know, and I mean, sometimes these have nice things in them, you know, that indicate that indicate, you know, really positive things about the student. So, you know, probably the better ones would tend to come from classes that are small and more discussion oriented. And the ones that might be considered a bit more relevant would be, you know, assuming that you're a biology student, at least, you know, from classes that are some type of upper level bio course. We do see other types of letters. You know, sometimes we see letters where maybe the student was just very proud of their grade, but it was a lecture class. And so there's not a whole lot that the writer can do aside from saying, you know, this student was, you know, number X out of Y total students in the whole class. And here's what this class was about. And I support their application to grad school. I mean, you know, that letter is not going to keep you out of grad school, certainly, but it doesn't have a whole lot to offer that wasn't already on your transcript. So, and yeah, sometimes we also get letters from non-science instructors as well, and that isn't necessarily wrong. You know, I mean, maybe a few times ever, like, you know, we've gotten a really compelling letter, from an instructor in, a subject like Latin or something like that. It's rare, um, but again, it's not necessarily wrong if you really think that person has important things to say about you. And if you happen to have done some sort of teaching and there is, a faculty member here, or, someone, in a high level professional role here who can speak to that, that could be another option to consider, if you're not sure who else to ask for a letter. Other possibilities, if you have, some notable leadership experience, or you've displayed great resilience in some way, is there a university professional who can speak to that? It's kind of hard for me to give specific examples here, but like, I mean, it could be a faculty advisor of, a student group that you've been active in, especially, if it's more science oriented, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes we also get letters from academic advisors. Maybe at some schools, like depending on the ratio of students to advisors, the advisor might know them pretty well. I'm not sure that's often the case here, frankly. But yeah, I don't know if these are often super helpful, but if you think it is in your case, then it could be worth considering. Or, maybe the head of a program that you're involved in. So, like if you've been part of, like a program that is kind of like a cohort-based STEM undergraduate program, sometimes like the head of that program will have a decent perspective on someone's progression toward graduate school. So we sometimes get letters from people like the head of their MARC program or something like that. And, that can be a good thing too. Really, this all depends on individual circumstances. The one thing I'd suggest not doing, it just doesn't register very professionally. And I've only seen this once in a great while, but I've occasionally seen references for grad school, which are kind of like the references that you might have given when you applied for your first job. Like a good friend of your family who would say very nice things about you. You don't want to do that for grad school. This should have some connection to your educational and professional history, I would say, at this stage. Next up, how do you ask them for a letter? This might feel kind of intimidating in some cases. So it's up to you. You can ask them in person if you want. It's also totally fine to send an email. Follow up if you need to. And so what do you tell them? This is very relevant to next week's assignment, of course. So first of all, let them know what your goals are. Tell them that, you've decided that you want to apply for PhD programs to do research in this particular area. And let them know why you think it is that they might be one of the best choices to provide a letter of recommendation for you, assuming that's not completely obvious. And, I would say don't just ask if they're willing to do it. Ask if they feel able to give you a positive letter. Because if they don't, then, well, you probably don't want their letter. And if they seem like an essential person and they're still pretty wishy-washy about that, might not be time yet, to be honest. You might need to uh, have another research experience in another lab, and make your next advisor into a really big fan of you, and then you might be ready to go. Last thing, I thought I would mention that, especially like if you're asking someone who is not currently in academia, or even someone here but they're not a professor, it's possible that they might be a little bit less in touch with what graduate programs are looking for in letters of recommendation. And so, they might write a more generic sort of letter, or they might just not be sure. And so professors, I don't feel like necessarily need this, but if you're asking someone else for whatever reason, you might want to at least drop in a link. Like, if you need any guidance, say if you need any guidance on what might be worth mentioning in such a letter, here's a general set of guidelines. Because it's easy enough to find these on the web. But what you don't want is someone who is kind of out of touch with this sort of thing, writing a letter without, those things in mind. Sometimes I see this, I think I mentioned early on, like in terms of the different things that people sometimes do after graduating, that, I do see some variability in quality, especially like among letters from industry. So like your supervisor for a biotech company lab research position that you did, or internship or whatever, some of them do a very good job. And, correspondingly, you saw that some of our incoming grad students are coming from positions in industry. So obviously that worked out well enough for them, including their letters of recommendation. I have also seen some letters from the industry side that were disappointing, and I wasn't sure that really reflected, the applicant being underwhelming, although it's hard to really judge in our situation. Very brief letters, or just superficial letters in terms of not necessarily addressing the things that we're looking for. So what are we looking for? Well, it's hard to generalize, to both like research and non-research letters, especially. But any letter should, be clear about the context of your interaction and the specific attributes and skills that you demonstrated in that context, and how those things will help you to be a successful graduate student. And there should be some detail behind that description. And often, especially I would say for like research advisor letters, there's a bit of a summary statement. If not a comparative statement, at least, something that conveys the magnitude of the enthusiasm behind their recommendation. And so we see the whole spectrum, and it's very informative. We see everything from kind of a flat sort of, I'm therefore happy to recommend so-and-so for your program, through therefore I enthusiastically recommend so-and-so for admission to your graduate program, to therefore so-and-so has my highest possible recommendation for admission to your graduate program. Yeah, we see it all, of course. You know, in some cases, letter writers get kind of quantitative about that, you know, like I feel like they're in the top, you know, X% of undergraduates in terms of their uh, graduate preparation or their research ability, or I feel like they're already, you know, um, operating at the level of, you know, a typical grad student or even a good grad student, you know, in you know, high-end cases. Um, so yeah, I mean, you know, in whatever way is relevant, it's good to convey, you know, how enthusiastic the recommender is about this applicant, um, you know, either explicitly or implicitly, you know, compared to other potential applicants. One thing I thought I would point out as well is that here and in most other places, applicants are also asked to fill out this sort of like bubble score matrix. And so, you know, it could be interesting just to look at the sort of skills that they're um, asked to assess you in by UW at least. Now, a couple of these are not really relevant, you know, for our program specifically, like clinical skills or foreign language skills. Most of the others are pretty relevant. And, you know, these range from both, you know, both research skill type things and communication skills, and also the character traits down there too. And so in general, you know, these bubble scores tend to the high end of things, you know, it might just be human nature, but you know, at the same time, there's variability, you know, they're not all of these skills have the same score often. Sometimes they do. So anyway, just in terms of giving you the admissions eye view, I mean, this is moderately informative for us, but we do kind of take it with a grain of salt, you know, because some people are just naturally more stringent than others when they go to fill out something like this. So there's a lot of reviewer variation. Sometimes, like, you know, these scores might look a little bit more middle of the road to us. You know, maybe their overall assessment was strong rather than outstanding, but you read the letter and it seems really good. Other times, like, you know, okay, like maybe they sort of mailed it in, you know, like they, um, you know, like they just, you know, did like exceptional, 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 outstanding. You read the letter, it seems kind of underwhelming. So, you know, we have to consider everything in front of us, of course. So that's all I've got for today. So today my goal was to get through the application to really show you what's involved. And then in future classes, we'll come back to a couple of things. Now for next time, really following up on part of what we talked about today, your assignment is to submit a list of letter writers and your reasons briefly for choosing each of them. And so I say propose a list of 3. If you want to put more than 3, that's fine. But you know, shouldn't be less than 3. And so, you know, this will be submitted again by Canvas discussion. Again, if there's any reason you don't want to do that, let me know. And then I do also want to point out that in 2 weeks, your draft statement of purpose is due, and that is clearly a big one. So, you know, you really should be at least getting started on that by now. So that's all I've got here, and I will do Q&A with the in-person course participants shortly here. That is at 3:20 local time today.